The emergency meeting room beneath Geneva buzzed with nervous energy as world leaders gathered around the massive holographic display. Outside, snow fell gently on the Swiss mountains, but inside, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. As the alien transmission began to play, Admiral Roberts had seen many things in his 40 years of military service, but nothing quite like this. The creature that appeared before them stood 12 feet tall, its body covered in what looked like natural armor plating. 4 arms extended from its torso, each ending in claws that could probably tear through steel. When it spoke, its voice carried the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. "I am High Commander Threll of the Galactic Hegemony Council," the hologram announced. The translation software worked perfectly, but somehow made the words even more chilling. "Your species has been observed for some time now. The Council has grown concerned about your rapid expansion and unpredictable nature." The various presidents and prime ministers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked frightened, others angry, but Admiral Roberts found himself fighting back a smile. There was something almost amusing about the whole situation. "You have been granted 72 of your planetary rotations to comply with the following demands," Threll continued, his forearms gesturing dramatically. "First, you will surrender all weapons of war. Second, you will dismantle your military forces completely. Third, you will accept hegemony oversight of all government functions. Fourth, you will cease all expansion beyond your current territory." President Chen of the Pacific Alliance leaned forward. "And if we refuse?" The alien's expression grew even more intimidating. 47 species have already learned the cost of refusal. None chose to repeat the lesson. We possess the firepower to reduce your worlds to ash. We have ships that can block out your sun. We have weapons that can crack planets like eggs. This is not a negotiation. This is an inevitability. The transmission ended, leaving the room in heavy silence. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Admiral Roberts began to chuckle. The sound started small but grew louder as he thought about what they had just witnessed. Soon, General Martinez joined him, then President Okafor, and within minutes the entire room was filled with laughter. 72 hours, Roberts said, wiping tears from his eyes. "They gave us a whole 3 days. How thoughtful of them. Did you see how serious he looked?" Martinez added. "Like a school principal threatening detention." President Chen managed to compose himself first. "This isn't funny. These aliens could be telling the truth. They might actually have the power to destroy us." "Oh, they probably do," Roberts agreed, still grinning. "But they made one tiny mistake. They assumed we'd be scared. The truth was, humanity had been preparing for this moment for decades, not specifically for the Galactic Hegemony Council, but for exactly this kind of situation. Ever since humans first left Earth and began spreading across the stars, military planners had asked themselves one simple question: what happens when we meet something bigger and meaner than us? The answer had shaped everything. Every colony ship carried weapons. Every mining station had defensive capabilities. Every research outpost could fight if needed. Humans had learned long ago that the universe was a dangerous place, and they had prepared accordingly. "Should we tell them about the defense networks?" Martinez asked. Roberts shook his head. "Not yet. Let them think we're just another scared little species. It'll make the surprise more interesting." Over the next few hours, messages went out through secure channels to every human settlement in known space. The messages were simple and direct. Code-red protocols were now in effect. The theoretical had become reality. It was time to show the galaxy what humans were really capable of. On Mars, the colony administrator received her orders and smiled. The massive mining equipment that had been digging tunnels for the past decade had a secondary function that most people didn't know about. Those weren't just transportation tunnels. They were launch tubes for kinetic weapons that could hit targets anywhere in the solar system. In the asteroid belt, miners working the rocks got similar messages. Their industrial equipment looked peaceful enough, but mass drivers designed to move ore could launch other things just as well. Tungsten rods, for example, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The space stations orbiting Jupiter appeared to be simple research facilities studying the gas giant's moons. In reality, they were weapons platforms disguised as scientific installations. The same was true for stations throughout human space. Every research post, every commercial hub, every seemingly innocent outpost was hiding military capabilities. But the real genius of human preparation wasn't in any single weapon or defense system. It was in the philosophy behind it all. Humans had learned from their own history that the best defense was to make sure every target could fight back. Every colony was a fortress. Every ship was a potential warship. Every citizen was a potential soldier. The Galactic Hegemony Council had conquered 47 species by following a simple pattern. Show overwhelming force. Demand surrender. Glass. A few planets as examples if necessary. Most species followed predictable military doctrines and could be defeated by superior firepower applied at key points. Humans had thrown that playbook out the window. They had no key points to strike because everything was a key point. They had no central command structure to decapitate because command was distributed everywhere. They had no obvious military to defeat because their entire civilization was their military. As news of the alien ultimatum spread through human space, the response was remarkably consistent. From the farming colonies to the industrial worlds, from the scientific outposts to the trading stations, humans reacted with the same mixture of amusement and determination. They had been waiting for this moment. They had prepared for it. And, now that it was here, they were almost eager to show these galactic bullies what happened when you threatened humanity. The 72-hour countdown had begun, but humans weren't spending it in fear or desperate preparation. They were spending it making final adjustments to systems that had been ready for years, checking weapons that had been maintained in secret, and sending messages to loved ones before the shooting started. High Commander Threll and his council had made their demand. They wanted Earth's surrender. Instead, they were going to get something they had never encountered before in their centuries of conquest. A species that answered threats with laughter because they knew something their enemies didn't. The galaxy was about to learn why humans grinned in the face of danger. It was because they were the danger. The coffee shop on Luna Station served the best brew this side of Earth, which made it the perfect place for Dr. Patricia Wong to conduct her most important meeting. To anyone watching, she looked like a typical research scientist having breakfast with colleagues. The reality was quite different. "Status report," she said quietly, stirring sugar into her cup while her companions did the same. Tom Bradley, who officially managed waste disposal for the lunar colonies, spoke first. "The Gods shotgun network is fully operational. All 47 installations are online and loaded. We've got tungsten rods ready to launch from here to the edge of the system." Patricia nodded. The kinetic bombardment network had been her pet project for 15 years. Every major asteroid, moon, and space station in human territory now housed what appeared to be mining equipment or industrial machinery. In reality, they were mass drivers capable of launching dense metal projectiles at incredible speeds. Beautiful. "Thing about kinetic weapons," she mused. "No energy signatures to detect, no exotic materials to trace. Just good old-fashioned physics doing what it does best." Lisa Park, whose official job was managing hydroponics on the agricultural stations, grinned. "The farms are ready too. Turns out grain silos make excellent missile launchers when you design them right. We've got enough firepower hidden in our food production facilities to level a fleet." This was the secret that the Galactic Hegemony Council couldn't possibly understand. Humans didn't build military installations and then try to hide them. They built civilian installations and hid military capabilities inside them. Every single structure in human space served at least two purposes, and only one of those purposes was obvious. Meanwhile, 800 light-years away, High Commander Threll was reviewing intelligence reports that frustrated him more each time. He read them. Human military capabilities appeared laughably weak. Their largest warships were tiny compared to hegemony vessels. Their weapons technology seemed primitive. Their defenses looked almost non-existent. "This cannot be correct," he muttered to Sub-Commander Klext. "No species spreads across dozens of systems with such limited firepower. They must be hiding something." Klext, a veteran of 23 conquest campaigns, studied the data with growing confusion. Perhaps they rely on speed and stealth rather than direct confrontation. Some species attempt to avoid conflict entirely. "Then why did they laugh at our ultimatum?" Threll demanded. "Fear would have been understandable. Despair would have been reasonable. But laughter? What kind of species laughs when faced with extinction?" The answer to that question was becoming clear across human space as seemingly ordinary. People revealed their extraordinary preparations. The shopkeeper on New Tokyo Station, who had been selling supplies to travelers for 10 years, calmly activated the defensive systems hidden beneath her store. The tour guide on Europa, who showed visitors the ice formations, stopped giving tours and started calibrating the weapons concealed under the frozen surface. On the agricultural world called Harvest, farmers who had spent decades growing food for the colonies began checking different kinds of equipment. The massive combines that harvested grain had secondary functions involving high-velocity projectile systems. The irrigation networks could deliver more than water when necessary. Even the grain storage facilities were designed to serve as launch platforms. This was human paranoia at its finest. For generations, humans had asked themselves a simple question: what if everything went wrong at once? What if we were attacked by something we couldn't negotiate with, couldn't reason with, couldn't defeat through normal means? The answer had been to make sure that normal means weren't their only option, or their second option, or even their 10th option. Humans had backup plans for their backup plans, and weapon systems hidden inside their weapon systems. Back on Earth, Admiral Roberts was coordinating with military commanders who technically didn't exist. Colonel Davis officially ran a shipping company that moved cargo between colonies. In reality, every one of his freighters was a disguised warship capable of taking on vessels 10 times their size. "Stealth systems are holding perfectly," Davis reported. "The alien sensors are reading our ships exactly as we want them to. Cargo haulers, passenger liners, research vessels, and mining equipment. They have no idea that every single civilian vessel in human space is armed for war." This was perhaps the most audacious part of the human strategy. They had weaponized their entire merchant fleet while making it look completely harmless. A grain transport could launch missiles. A passenger liner could fire kinetic rounds. A research ship studying asteroids could crack open a battleship. General Martinez reviewed the tactical situation with satisfaction. Phase 1 is complete. All assets are in position and ready for activation. Phase 2 begins in 18 hours. "What about their intelligence gathering?" Roberts asked. "They're seeing exactly what we want them to see. Every scan they run confirms that we're a weak, scattered species with minimal military capability. They have no idea that they're looking at the most distributed weapons system ever created." The genius of human strategy wasn't in building bigger guns or stronger shields. It was in making their enemies think there were no guns or shields at all. Every hegemony scan would confirm that human ships were lightly armed civilian vessels. Every reconnaissance mission would report that human colonies were peaceful settlements with basic defensive capabilities. What the scanners couldn't detect was intent. They couldn't measure the decades of planning that had gone into making sure every human outpost could defend itself. They couldn't quantify the philosophy that had turned an entire civilization into a weapon disguised as a peaceful society. On the hegemony flagship Dominator, Threll received the final intelligence report from his scout ships. The humans had made no military preparations that sensors could detect. No fleet movements, no weapon deployments, no defensive positions being established. They appeared to be doing absolutely nothing in response to the ultimatum. They must be paralyzed with fear, Klext suggested. Some species simply freeze when confronted with impossible odds. Threll wasn't convinced. Something felt wrong about the whole situation, but he couldn't identify what it was. The humans had the technological capability to detect his approaching fleet, so they knew the threat was real. They had the communication networks to coordinate a response, so they weren't simply unprepared. Yet they seemed to be taking no action whatsoever. Perhaps they truly believed their laughter was an adequate response, he said finally. Some primitive species engage in ritual behaviors when faced with threats they cannot understand. What Threll couldn't understand was that human laughter wasn't a ritual or a sign of fear. It was a sign of confidence. Humans laughed when they knew something their opponents didn't. They laughed when they were holding all the cards but letting their enemies think the deck was stacked against them. The final preparations were subtle but crucial. Weapon systems that had been disguised as industrial equipment for years underwent final calibration checks. Navigation computers updated firing solutions that had been calculated months in advance. Communication networks tested the coordination. Protocols that would turn thousands of separate installations into a single devastating weapons platform. The most remarkable thing about these preparations was how ordinary they looked. Farmers checking their equipment, miners maintaining their machinery, station operators running system diagnostics. To any external observer, human space looked exactly as peaceful and unprepared as it always had. But beneath that peaceful surface, something unprecedented in galactic history was taking shape. An entire civilization had turned itself into a trap, and the trap was about to be sprung. The Galactic Hegemony Council had demanded surrender and received laughter in response. Soon, they would understand why. The bridge of the Hegemony flagship Dominator hummed with quiet efficiency as the massive fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. High Commander Threll stood before the main viewing screen, watching, as 800 warships arranged themselves in the traditional formation that had intimidated 47 species into immediate surrender. The sight was genuinely impressive. Massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons, sleek destroyers designed for speed and firepower, carrier vessels loaded with fighter craft, and the command ships that coordinated it all. This was the full might of the Galactic Hegemony Council, a force that had never failed to achieve its objectives. "Sensor sweep complete, Commander," reported the tactical officer. "The system appears to be as our intelligence indicated. Minimal military presence, light defensive installations, and primarily civilian traffic." Threll nodded, though something still felt wrong about the situation. The humans should be mobilizing everything they had, even if it was pathetically inadequate. Instead, their ships continued to move along normal commercial routes as if nothing had changed. "Send the final ultimatum," he ordered. "Make it clear that this is their last opportunity to surrender with dignity." The transmission that reached Earth was simple and direct. "This is High Commander Threll of the Galactic Hegemony Council. You have seen our fleet. You understand your situation. Surrender now, and your species will be allowed to serve the Council. Refuse, and you will be destroyed. You have one of your hours to respond." The human response came exactly 59 minutes later. Admiral Roberts appeared on screen, sitting casually in what looked like an ordinary office rather than a military command center. He was smiling that same unsettling human smile that had puzzled hegemony analysts for days. "Commander Threll, this is Admiral Roberts of Earth Defense Command. Thank you for the generous offer, but we're going to have to pass. You see, we've grown rather fond of our independence over the years. However, we'd like to make a counteroffer of our own." Roberts leaned back in his chair, his smile widening. "Turn your ships around right now, leave our system quietly, and we promise to make your retreat look dignified. We'll even provide escort ships to make sure you get home safely." The laughter that followed was clearly audible, even through the transmission static. Other human voices could be heard in the background, all of them sharing the same inexplicable amusement. We appreciate that you've come all this way to visit, Roberts continued. It shows real commitment. But I'm afraid you've picked the wrong species to threaten. We're not the surrendering type. Never have been, never will be. The transmission ended with more laughter. Threll stared at the blank screen in disbelief. They're mocking us. In the face of certain destruction, they're making jokes. Perhaps their mental processes cannot cope with the reality of their situation, suggested Sub-Commander Klext. Some species experience psychological breakdown when faced with overwhelming force. Then we will provide them with clarity, Threll declared. Target their lunar installations. One surgical strike should demonstrate the futility of resistance. The order went out to the fleet's heavy weapons platforms. Targeting systems locked onto Luna Station, the largest human installation in Earth orbit. Energy weapons capable of cracking moons began to charge. This would be a demonstration that 47 species had learned to respect. That was when everything went wrong. The first indication of trouble came from the sensor stations. Commander, I'm detecting multiple high-velocity objects approaching. From various vectors, speed is approximately 12% of light speed. Impossible, Threll snapped. Nothing in this system has the capability to... The tungsten rod that struck Dominator amidships was only 2 meters long and 30 centimeters wide, but at 12% of light speed, it carried more kinetic energy than a small nuclear weapon. The flagship's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and deflect slower projectiles, might as well have been made of paper. The impact sent shockwaves through the massive vessel. Emergency alarms screamed across the bridge as hull breaches were reported throughout the ship. Before anyone could respond, more impacts began striking vessels across the fleet. "Where are they coming from?" Threll roared, clutching his command chair as another kinetic round hammered his ship. "Everywhere, sir," the sensor officer reported in amazement. "The asteroids, the moons, the planets, the space stations, even the civilian installations are firing projectiles. The entire system appears to be weaponized." This was the moment when the true scope of human preparation became clear. What the hegemony had seen as a peaceful solar system with minimal defenses was actually the largest weapons platform ever constructed. Every asteroid had been hollowed out and fitted with mass drivers. Every moon housed kinetic bombardment systems. Every space station concealed weapons that had been decades in the making. The mining equipment on Ceres that looked so innocent was actually a massive railgun capable of launching projectiles clear across the system. The research stations studying Jupiter's moons were weapons platforms disguised as scientific installations. Even the orbital elevators weren't just transportation infrastructure. They were enormous kinetic weapons that could fire continuously. "This is impossible," Klext whispered as he watched the tactical display. Hundreds of projectiles were converging on the hegemony fleet from every direction. No species militarizes their entire civilization like this. But humans had done exactly that. For decades, every construction project had been planned with dual purposes in mind. Every mining operation had hidden military applications. Every research facility could double as a weapons platform. Every piece of industrial equipment had been designed to kill enemy ships if necessary. The results were devastating. Hegemony vessels that had never been threatened by anything smaller than a capital ship found themselves being systematically destroyed by what their sensors barely registered as tiny pieces of metal. Ships that could survive direct hits from heavy energy weapons were being torn apart by simple kinetic projectiles moving at impossible speeds. "Evasive maneuvers," Threll ordered, but there was nowhere to run. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a maze of kill zones, with projectiles coming from every possible angle. No matter which direction the hegemony ships turned, they found themselves facing more incoming fire. Worse, the civilian vessels that had been peacefully moving through the system were now revealing their true nature. The cargo hauler that had been carrying grain from the agricultural worlds suddenly accelerated with impossible speed and began firing missiles. The passenger liner transporting colonists deployed weapons that rivaled those of hegemony destroyers. The research vessel studying solar radiation was actually a stealth warship that had been hiding in plain sight. "They're all warships," someone reported in shock. "Every civilian vessel in this system is armed and shielded." This was the final piece of the human strategy. Not only had they weaponized their infrastructure, but they had also disguised their entire military fleet as civilian vessels. What looked like a peaceful merchant marine was actually a navy that had been designed from the ground up to look harmless while being absolutely deadly. The Battle of Saul, as historians would later call it, lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. When it was over, only 37 ships of the original 800 remained operational enough to attempt retreat. High Commander Threll, his flagship crippled and his fleet destroyed, finally understood what he had encountered. The humans hadn't just prepared for war. They had turned their entire way of life into an instrument of war while making it look like a peaceful civilization. As the surviving hegemony vessels limped away from the solar system, they carried with them a new understanding of what humanity represented. This wasn't just another species to be conquered. This was something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization that could be simultaneously peaceful and deadly, scattered yet unified, apparently vulnerable yet effectively invincible. The Council had demanded Earth's surrender. Instead, they had received a lesson in why some species earned their freedom by being willing and able to defend it. The medical bay aboard the hegemony vessel Retribution buzzed with desperate activity as surviving crew members tried to save their wounded comrades. Sub-Commander Klext moved between the injured, his 4 arms trembling not from exhaustion but from the shock of what they had just experienced. Never in his 30 years of military service had Klext witnessed anything like the systematic destruction of the hegemony fleet. They had faced resistance before, certainly. Some species fought back with courage and determination. Others had superior technology in specific areas. But what had happened at Sul was something entirely different. "Status report, High Commander," Threll demanded as he entered the medical bay, his own injuries making him move stiffly. Half his command crew was dead or wounded, and his flagship was barely holding together. 37 ships escaped the kill zone, sir," Klext reported. "Total casualties are estimated at over 400,000 personnel. The humans destroyed 863 vessels in less than 5 hours. Threll absorbed this information with the kind of numbness that comes from experiencing something that shouldn't be possible. The Battle of Saul hadn't just been a defeat. It had been a revelation that everything the hegemony thought they knew about warfare was wrong. "How did they coordinate it?" he asked. "The timing was perfect. Thousands of separate installations firing in precise sequence from across an entire solar system. That level of coordination should be impossible without detectable communication networks." The answer to that question was becoming clear as human broadcasts began reaching the retreating hegemony ships. What they were hearing wasn't military coordination in any form they recognized. It was something much more disturbing. Ordinary humans going about their daily lives while casually managing a weapon system that spanned billions of kilometers. "Morning shift reports all targets eliminated in Sector 7, came one transmission. "Coffee's ready in the break room if anyone wants some. Asteroid Platform Charlie 9 confirming direct hits on enemy formation Delta. Nice shooting, everyone. By the way, has anyone seen my thermos? Research Station Europa here. We've got wounded enemy survivors requesting medical assistance. Dispatching rescue teams now. Also, somebody left their lunch in the common area refrigerator again." This casual attitude toward the greatest military victory in human history was perhaps more unsettling than the victory itself. These people had just destroyed the most powerful fleet in galactic history, and they were worried about coffee and forgotten lunches. "They're not even celebrating," Klext observed with bewilderment. "They just eliminated our entire invasion force, and they're talking about everyday concerns." What the hegemony survivors didn't understand was that this was exactly how humans had planned it. The defense of Seoul wasn't being treated as an extraordinary military operation because it wasn't one. It was just another day at the office for people whose regular jobs happened to include operating the most sophisticated weapon system ever created. The asteroid miner who had been extracting ore for 15 years had simply switched from moving rocks to launching tungsten rods. The farmer who had been growing food for the colonies had activated the missile systems hidden in his grain silos. The research scientist studying Jupiter's atmosphere had targeted enemy ships with the same precision. She used to study atmospheric phenomena. This was the true genius of human strategy. They hadn't created a military force and then tried to disguise it as a civilian population. They had created a civilian population that could function as a military force without changing their fundamental nature. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Roberts was dealing with a problem that no military commander in galactic history had ever faced. What to do when your enemy was completely defeated but still had wounded survivors who needed help. Medical ship Mercy is requesting permission to assist enemy casualties, Captain Williams reported. We have the resources to treat their wounded, but protocol is unclear. Roberts considered this for a moment. Human military doctrine had covered every conceivable scenario except what to do when you won too completely. Grant permission. Provide whatever assistance they need. Full medical support. No restrictions. This decision would prove to be almost as shocking to the hegemony survivors as their military defeat. The humans who had just destroyed their fleet were now offering to heal their wounded. It was a level of civilized conduct that no hegemony species had ever demonstrated or experienced. The medical assistance came with no strings attached, no demands for information, no attempts to extract strategic intelligence. Human medical teams simply boarded hegemony vessels and began treating casualties with the same professional competence they brought to everything else. "Why are you helping us?" Threll asked Dr. Patricia Wong as she worked to save the life of one of his officers. "We came here to destroy you." Wong looked up from her patient with the same calm expression she had worn while calibrating kinetic weapons systems just hours earlier. "Because that's what civilized people do. You fight when you have to. You help when you can. It's not complicated." But it was complicated, at least from the hegemony perspective. Their entire philosophy was based on the idea that superior force justified dominion over weaker species. They had never encountered a species that could demonstrate overwhelming military superiority while simultaneously offering humanitarian aid to their defeated enemies. As the surviving hegemony vessels limped toward the edge of the solar system, they received one final transmission from Admiral Roberts. The message was brief and to the point, but it would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. "Commander Threll, this is Admiral Roberts. Your wounded have been stabilized and your ships are cleared to depart. We want you to understand something important. What happened here today wasn't personal. You threatened our freedom, so we defended ourselves. That's what humans do." Roberts paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a weight that made everyone listening pay attention. "But we want you to know that this could have been avoided entirely. All you had to do was leave us alone. We don't want to conquer anyone. We don't want to rule anybody. We just want to be left in peace to live our lives as we choose. Unfortunately, the universe seems to be full of people who won't allow that." The transmission showed Roberts sitting in what still looked like an ordinary office rather than a military command center. Behind him, through a window, normal human life continued. People walking to work, children playing in parks, families enjoying the afternoon sun. "You see, Commander, that's what you never understood about us. We don't fight because we're warlike or aggressive. We fight because we're peaceful. We've learned that peace is something you have to be willing and able to defend, or someone will always try to take it away from you." Roberts smiled, that same unsettling human smile that had started this whole confrontation. Take a message back to your council, Commander. Tell them that humanity is not interested in joining their empire, serving their purposes, or following their rules. We're quite happy being left alone. But if anyone else decides to threaten that, they'll get the same lesson you just received. Adieu. Transmission ended, leaving the surviving hegemony personnel to contemplate what they had learned. Humanity wasn't just another species to be conquered or catalogued. They represented something entirely new in galactic politics, a civilization that had achieved true peace by being prepared for total war. As the damaged hegemony ships finally reached the edge of human space, they carried with them news that would change everything. The age of easy conquest was over. There was now a species in the galaxy that could defend itself so effectively that attacking them was essentially suicide, yet was civilized enough to heal their enemies wounded after the battle was won. The galactic balance of power had shifted permanently, and it had happened because one species had learned to grin in the face of threats, not from ignorance or bravado, but from the quiet confidence that came with being thoroughly prepared for anything the universe might throw at them. The council chamber on Hegemon Prime had never been designed for the kind of meeting that was taking place now. For over 1,000 years, this vast circular room had hosted discussions about conquest, expansion, and the management of subject species. Today, for the first time in its history, it was being used to discuss retreat. High Commander Threll stood in the center of the chamber, his injuries still visible despite the best medical treatment the hegemony could provide. Around him, in tiered seating that rose toward a domed ceiling, sat the most powerful beings in known space. The Council of Hegemons represented 47 conquered civilizations, and every one of them was struggling to understand what had happened at Sol. "Repeat your report, Commander," ordered Supreme Hegemon Vorth, his ancient voice carrying across the chamber through sophisticated translation systems. "The Council wishes to hear every detail." Threll had given this report dozens of times over the past week, but the disbelief in the chamber never diminished. The human defense was unlike anything in our historical records. Their entire civilization appears to be weaponized, but in ways that our intelligence systems cannot detect until activation. "You mean they hid their military capabilities?" interrupted Hegemon Zell, whose species had been among the first to surrender to the Council centuries ago. "This is not unprecedented." "No, Hegemon. They did not hide military capabilities. They integrated military functions into civilian infrastructure, so completely that the distinction becomes meaningless. A human farmer is simultaneously a farmer and an artillery operator. A human miner is simultaneously a miner and a weapons technician. The implications of this were staggering. Every species the Council had encountered operated under the same basic principle. There were civilians and there were military forces, and you could tell the difference between them. Humans had eliminated that distinction entirely. Furthermore, Threll continued, their response to victory was unprecedented. After destroying our fleet, they offered medical assistance to our survivors. They treated our wounded with the same care they would provide to their own people. This revelation caused an uncomfortable stir throughout the chamber. In 1,000 years of conquest, no Council species had ever experienced anything like humanitarian treatment from an enemy. The concept was almost incomprehensible. Supreme Hegemon Vorth leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber floor. "What is your assessment of human military capabilities?" "Unknown and potentially unlimited," Threll replied without hesitation. What we encountered at Sol was clearly not their full defensive capability. It was simply what they had available in one star system. Intelligence suggests they have similar preparations throughout their territory. Recommendations? Threll took a deep breath before delivering the words that no hegemony commander had ever spoken in this chamber. Complete avoidance of human space. No further contact of any kind. Classification of humans as a protected species under Council. Directive 7. Directive 7 was a law that had never been used. It was designed for species so dangerous that any contact with them posed an existential threat to the Council itself. Until now, no such species had been discovered. The debate that followed would continue for weeks, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Battle of Sol had demonstrated something that changed the fundamental assumptions underlying hegemony expansion. There could be species in the galaxy that were simply too dangerous to conquer, too well prepared to intimidate, and too civilized to justify attacking. Meanwhile, back in human space, life had returned to its normal rhythm with remarkable speed. The asteroid miners were back to extracting ore, though their mass drivers remained ready for other purposes. The farmers were tending their crops, though their missile silos stayed armed and maintained. The researchers were studying their subjects, though their weapon systems underwent regular testing. Dr. Patricia Wong sat in the same coffee shop on Luna Station, where she had coordinated humanity's greatest military victory, now discussing quarterly maintenance schedules for equipment that officially didn't exist. To anyone watching, it looked like a perfectly ordinary business meeting. The kinetic bombardment network performed better than expected, Tom Bradley reported between sips of coffee. 0 malfunctions across all 47 installations. The targeting systems were accurate to within centimeters at interplanetary distances. Good, Patricia nodded. But we need to upgrade the loading mechanisms. If we ever face a larger fleet, we'll need faster firing rates. This casual discussion of devastating weapons over morning coffee perfectly captured the human approach to defense. They had created the most sophisticated military system in galactic history, and they talked about it the same way other species discussed farming equipment or transportation networks. The news of humanity's victory had spread through the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Species that had never heard of humans were suddenly very interested in learning more about them. More importantly, species that had been conquered by the hegemony were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about their own subjugation. On the industrial world of Kepra, which had surrendered to the Council 3 centuries earlier, factory workers were having discussions that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. If humans could defeat the entire hegemony fleet, why did we surrender without fighting? Asked Rem, a maintenance supervisor who had never questioned Council authority before. His colleague Dalto looked around nervously before answering. Because we thought resistance was impossible. Because we believed the Council was too powerful to oppose. But it wasn't impossible, was it? The humans proved that. Similar conversations were taking place on dozens of worlds throughout hegemony space. The psychological foundation of the Council's power had always been the belief that resistance was futile. Humanity had shattered that belief simply by existing and fighting back successfully. Back on Earth, Admiral Roberts was dealing with an unexpected consequence of their victory. Other species were trying to contact them. The communication networks were flooded with messages from governments, resistance movements, and individual beings who wanted to understand how humanity had achieved what everyone thought was impossible. We're getting over 1,000 messages per hour, reported Communication Officer Davis. Everything from formal diplomatic inquiries to requests for military assistance. Half the galaxy wants to know our secret. Roberts considered this development with mixed feelings. Humanity had fought for the right to be left alone, but their victory was having the opposite effect. Instead of deterring contact, it was attracting attention from every corner of known space. Draft a standard response, he decided. Make it clear that we're not interested in building an empire or leading a rebellion. We just want to live in peace. But also, make it clear that we're willing to share defensive technologies with any species that asks politely. This decision would have profound consequences for galactic civilization. Humanity wasn't trying to replace the Hegemony Council as the dominant power. Instead, they were offering something unprecedented, the tools and knowledge necessary for other species to defend themselves. The first species to accept human assistance was the Altarians, whose homeworld had been stripped of resources by hegemony mining operations. Human engineers arrived quietly and began helping them build their own defensive networks, teaching them how to hide military capabilities within civilian infrastructure. Within months, the Altarian system looked almost identical to human space, peaceful on the surface, but with every installation capable of defending itself. When hegemony ships arrived to collect their regular tribute, they found themselves facing the same kind of distributed weapons network that had destroyed their fleet at Sol. The results were predictable. The hegemony forces retreated without engaging, and Altair declared its independence from Council rule. This pattern repeated throughout the galaxy as more species learned the human approach to defense. The key wasn't building larger fleets or more powerful weapons. The key was making every part of your civilization capable of fighting back, while making it look like a peaceful society to outside observers. The Hegemony Council found itself facing a crisis unlike anything in their history. Species they had controlled for centuries were suddenly developing defensive capabilities that made conquest impossible. Worse, these species were sharing their knowledge with others, creating a cascade effect that threatened the entire foundation of Council power. Supreme Hegemon Vorth called another emergency session to address what was being called the human problem. "They are not directly challenging our authority," reported Intelligence Director Cast. "They make no territorial claims, issue no ultimatums, and launch no attacks. They simply exist as an example of successful resistance, and that example is proving contagious." "Can we isolate them?" asked Hegemon Zell. "Cut off their communication with other species?" "Impossible. Their communication networks are as distributed as their weapons systems. They have relay stations throughout the galaxy disguised as commercial facilities. Even if we could identify them all, destroying them would require military action that we can no longer guarantee would succeed." The truth was becoming undeniable. The age of galactic empires was ending. Humanity had proved that any sufficiently motivated species could make itself unconquerable, and they were teaching others how to do the same. The galaxy was evolving from a collection of conquered territories into a community of independent civilizations. Years later, historians would mark the Battle of Sol as the turning point that changed everything, not because it was the largest battle or involved the most advanced technology, but because it demonstrated a simple truth that had somehow been forgotten. Freedom was always possible for those willing and able to defend it. The Galactic Hegemony. Council still existed, but its power was broken. Some species remained under Council control, either through choice or inability to change their circumstances. But many others had followed humanity's example, creating distributed defense networks that made them effectively independent. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had won a war by proving that war was unnecessary, if you were prepared for it. They had gained their freedom by showing others how to be free. And they had answered the Council's demand for surrender with more than just a grin. They had answered it with a revolution that changed the galaxy forever, all while maintaining that they just wanted to be left alone to live their lives in peace. That, perhaps, was the most human thing of all. Accidentally starting a galactic revolution while trying to avoid getting involved in galactic politics. The universe had learned why humans grinned in the face of danger. It was because they understood something that their enemies didn't. The best way to ensure peace was to be so thoroughly prepared for war that nobody would be foolish enough to start one.